And so what causes attribution error? So it happens, where does it come from? Why don't we recognize the influence of situational factors as much as we should? And so there are three main causes. First is the belief in a just world, or the theory of belief in a just world. So the belief in a just world is a theory or an idea that, things happen for a reason. Second cause or contributing factor to fundamental attribution error is that people are more salient of themselves than of the situation. So I can hear myself speaking. I can see myself acting out, moving my hands. And therefore, all of this is more salient to me. My internal factors and things are more salient to me. When other people behave, I see their behavior more so, or their behavior is more salient than the color of the walls, or the color of the lights, or the dimness of the lights. And so people are more salient than the aspects of the situations that are surrounding them. And then finally, we have a tendency to thin slice too often. So we're talking about thin slicing, we're talking about snap judgments, we're talking about heuristics, so on. And so, motivation to believe in a just world. The idea of a just world hypothesis is that people get what they deserve in life. So good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. And so people have a different, individual differences in terms of, that belief. Not everyone believes that to the same extent, but generally speaking, good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. Now, fundamental attribution error is one way of reassuring that there is no randomness in the world. If I work hard, I will succeed. If I'm a good person, I will be respected, and I will find friends, and I will find a social circle. Now, that's reassuring to me, and therefore I will find ways, and fundamental attribution error will help me structure my perception of the world in a way that, if I continue doing the things the way it is, then I'll be okay. Because we don't like being vulnerable to external factors. It's very difficult to us to accept total randomness in our world, or total randomness in situations. And so it gives us, to a certain extent, the illusion of control and the impression that, my behavior causes something else in other people, just like other people's behaviors causes something else in me. And so this is kind of like a way for us to kind of, reduce our anxiety and so on. Now, because in reality, the world is much more random than we think. We have a lot less control over things than we think, but it's very difficult for us to actually believe that and to think it and to kind of be peaceful with that, unless you're a Buddhist monk. The second aspect is perceptual salience, like I mentioned. So people are much more salient than situations. So perceptual salience is basically, the amount, the salience of the information that I see or that I perceive around me. So perceptual salience influences whether potential cause springs to mind and how readily it springs to mind. So if I see people more readily, if people are more salient, then I'll probably use them as a cause, as opposed to the color of the walls, or the dimness of the lights that I see less likely. And so fundamental attribution error occurs because people often are more attuned to things, happening, the people, the behaviors, and so they notice the people that's going on, and then they attribute the cause to that person, rather than seeing other things that were going around. And so that's another potential cause of attribution error. And then finally, we have our limited cognitive resources. We don't have gigabytes and terabytes and gigabytes of RAM and working memory and so on. We have limited resources that we can use to perceive and interpret the world. to manage all this information. And so sometimes we have to revert to thin slicing, to snap judgment, to heuristics, to kind of just, proceed with information. And so like we talked about in the social cognition class, this is where system 1 comes in. The intuitive system is sometimes used too often to make attributions. We come to conclusions too quickly because we lack information, we don't have time, or so on. And sometimes it's also, for example, in the example of the not helping the seminarian students, not helping the person in need because they're in a hurry. And so, some people would say, well, they didn't help because they're bad people, or because, they're actually not true good Samaritans. They're just not, they shouldn't be priests. Because we jump to the fact that it's the person that did it, not the situation that is the cause of the behavior. And sometimes we infer traits quite automatically. He cut me off, he's such a jerk, or he didn't open the door, he's such a jerk, and so on. And so these are ways that we thin slice, we make these snap judgments to come to these to the causes of other people's behaviors. Another example, for example, of that shows this thin slicing, or this kind of the difference between System 1 and System 2 in fundamental attribution, is these researchers asked participants to look at a video, silent video of a woman that was mainly acting nervously during a conversation. And then they were either told that she was describing her travel, world travel to the other person in the video, or they were told that she was describing her sexual fantasies to the other person in the video. So you could see that the context for her discussion was very different, pleasing world travel or in a kind of anxiety-inducing topics. And then the other participants were told that were either told to memorize topics while they were looking at the video, or the other group were just left alone. So you had 4 groups. And then at the end, they asked participants, how anxious is this person? And so when you ask people to just look at the videos and you give them the context, they're pretty good at saying, listen, yeah, if I were describing my sexual fantasy to someone else, I would be a little bit more anxious, than if I were describing my my world travel. And so the rational system in this case actually kind of worked pretty well. They used the rationality, they used the context decently to explain the person's the person's anxiety level. Now, when you distract someone, and when they're cognitively busy. So when I'm looking at the video, and I also have to be doing this other cognitive task to remember stuff. So I'm using resources from my system 2. Then what I'm going to revert to is what I see in the video, the behaviors that I see in the video. And what I see in the video, I mainly see this person being anxious. And so regardless if she's talking about her sexual fantasies, or if she's talking about her world travels, I will see her the same way. So I will be blind to the context. And so this is one way, or one cause of fundamental attribution error. If we're busy cognitively being consumed by something else, we'll revert to the thin slicing, to the heuristics, and then completely be oblivious to the context. Attributions can also stem from imagining alternatives, and so if you can think of, if it would have turned out differently, then or he or she could have did something to make it differently, and therefore they must be X, Y, and Z. And so that was somewhat complicated, but here you go. There's 2 different types of alternatives. You can either have the discounting principle, where, for example, you come up to a restaurant and your waiter is really friendly with you, or you come up to, well, back in the time when any shop that has a commission-based shop, and you've got the salesperson comes up to you, especially car salesman comes up to you, like, those people will be very friendly generally. Now, in your mind, you're saying, well, obviously they have to be friendly because they want to sell me something, and then therefore they want to make money. So their motivation for being friendly, you're discounting their friendliness because you know that their friendliness stems from this motivation of making money off of you. And then there's the opposite. There's the augmentation principle. So this is where actually you would expect people to do something, but they do the opposite, and then you actually increase the possibility of them being genuine. So for example, coming back to waiter or salesperson, let's say the car salesperson says, listen, you should not take this car. This is really cheap. It's got terrible warranty, and you should actually go get the other car. Then you would actually be more confident in their statements and more confident in what you're doing because you're assuming that they're telling you the real truth. Again, because of the motives that you're attributing to their baseline kind of behaviors. And so imagining alternatives actually can also influence the way that we explain other people's behaviors. And so these scenarios of imagining alternatives or explaining people's true motivations and true kind of impressions are quite difficult when people are in role. So when people are expected to act in a certain way, or their social norms, or their role is to be this way, that's where it's a little bit more difficult to actually accurately attribute or accurately predict why they're behaving this way. Other ways of, imagining alternatives, or when imaginative alternatives are kind of influence our attribution, is in counterfactual thinking. And so these are thoughts of what might have, what could have, what should have happened, only if. So we oftentimes imagine, well, if you wouldn't have done that, or if you had done this, you could have presented that. And so if you would have brought your mother to the hospital, you would have avoided her being, or avoiding her appendix bursting out. And so that way you say, well, you attribute the cause of your mother's kind of health problems to the person more so than the situation of, like, she's getting old, or she's been, whatever other factors. And so this counterfactual thinking is actually over exaggerating things. If behaviors would have been, if you have behaved differently, then the outcome would have been different also. You overemphasize the person's behavior. And then you also have the emotional amplification. And so this is where, again, you increase the emotional reaction to an event that is counterfactual, that is, after imagining it in your head, even if it happened or it didn't happen. So, for example, an example of this counterfactual thinking, especially in the emotional amplification, was they analyzed the pictures of Olympic athletes that have won the gold, bronze, and silver. And then they asked these athletes, who's happier with their medal. And it turns out that obviously the gold people win gold, they're pretty happy. But it turns out that the people who won bronze are actually just as happy, or perceived to be just as happy, as those who won gold. Why? Because their attribution for winning the bronze is that they won the bronze, versus the silver medal, which actually arguably is better placed than the bronze medal, but the silver medal lost to the gold medal. And so their attribution is, well, they're not as happy, because had I lost at the finals, I would have been kind of bummed out. And so this is kind of like, the bronze medalists were, using a downward focus, whereas the silver medalists were using an upward focus, or an upward comparison. And so the take-home message here is that, considering alternative outcomes, will affect our attribution and the emotions that we feel toward these attributions. And then because of this effect of counterfactual thinking, sometimes who are objectively better off, for example, the silver medalists, actually can sometimes feel worse than the bronze medalists. And the last aspect or the last kind of bit of information that, that influences our attribution and just, kind of influences all of this this stuff is the actor-observer difference. So realizing and recognizing that the situation that I'm finding myself will influences my viewpoint. And so if I'm an actor in a behavior or in an interaction versus if I'm an observer in an interaction, influences the attribution that both of us will make of that interaction. And so actor-observer difference is the difference between the attribution based on who is making the causal attribution. Is it the actor that's making the causal attribution, or is it the observer? And so the actor is usually inclined to make situational attributions. So I was late because I was stuck in a meeting with my boss. It was out of my control. It was just a situation. But you would say, but you were late because you don't value my friendship. Because as an observer of the relationship or the interaction, you would mainly blame internal factors. Or make causal attribution of internal factors. And so, why does this happen? What's going on? Well, first of all, the actor is disposed to explain behavior as due to the situation, right? Because I know kind of what's going on in my head. I value the friendship and I want to be there. It's just that my boss pulled me into a last-minute meeting and I had no control. And then the opposite is the observer will be disposed or predisposed to explain the behavior as part of the dispositional qualities of the actor. So the observer doesn't know what's going on in the actor's head. They don't know everything that's going on because, well, first of all, they don't have access to that information. They don't see. They might not. Well, obviously, if I was waiting in a coffee shop and my friend was at her office, I just don't see what's going on. There's no way for me to say. But regardless, I will still have a propensity of attributing the cause to her internal factors. And so, therefore, if we're using different information, and different information leads to different attributions. And so, the other aspect of also this actor-observer phenomenon is this perception salience or perceptual salience. So what's salient for me is actually different than what's salient for the observer, or what's salient for the actor is different than what's salient for the observer. And so, this is very important, especially in romantic relationships and friends relationship, because we assume that we know what's going on in our friend's house, friend's life, or whatever, or we could quickly attribute the causes of behaviors, but we don't have access to all that information, whether it's with a romantic partner and oftentimes the best scenario is just to ask them flat out. To try to be as honest as possible and to not judge or to not come to a thin slice or to a conclusion before they actually explained. Now, if they're lying to you, well, then that's a whole different story. But if there is an open and trust relationship, then, the best thing to do is to ask, the person, so how many times did you do the laundry this week? Once. Okay, I did it 3 times. So do you mind taking it this time? Or how many times did you whatever. And just out of a quick tidbit of information, in romantic relationships, especially people, or people that live together, not necessarily romantically, but the thing that is the most contentious conflict is amount of housework. Because everyone knows and everyone sees when they're doing the dishes and they're saying, I hate doing the dishes. And it's remember how in social cognition, negative events kind of are more kind of salient and are kind of more impactful. So I'm doing the dishes. I remember it. I remember every time I did the dishes. And obviously I don't remember every time that my my roommate made the dishes because I don't care about them. So this is a perfect example of the actor-observer effect, or difference actor-observer. And then the fact that I think that I'm always doing the dishes becomes a conflict, and then we get in a fight, and then whatever, that happens. And so remember that you don't have access to that other person's first viewpoint, and you don't have access to every time. So the best thing to do is just to ask them flat out, or you set up some kind of Excel sheet or whatever, try to make it as equal as possible, because we make attributions where maybe we shouldn't, and we're very good at coming up with terrible attributions, or misconstrued attributions. And so I'll just like to remember, keep working on your working papers to identify the IV, the DV, operationalize your independent variables and your dependent variables, so they can create and discrete or categorize and so on. And so with that, I will see you next week. Bye.